Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Administration Committee meeting of March 10th, 2022. And I'll call the meeting to order at 9:32 a.m. All in favor? Carried. And the land acknowledgement. As we gather this morning, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of this committee and our community that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Connie, has roll call been taken?
Through you, Chair, to committee. Yes, roll call has been taken.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Seeing none. Minutes. Were there any concerns of the minutes as presented? So could I get a mover and a seconder for the minutes as presented? Moved by Councillor Brose, seconded by Councillor Packett. All in favor? And that's carried. There's no delegations, so we'll move straight to the administration report. Mr. Morrow.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to committee. Just a reminder with respect to roll call, we are just at quorum right now. So if we could, should someone leave the meeting or need to leave the meeting, if we could inform Connie and the chair, just so we continue to have quorum. With that, Chair, there are several items for the administration report. The first item in the administration report is an information item regarding the Network 24 Ontario Health Team funding. Yesterday, I presented a bylaw and recommendation to pass a bylaw allowing the County of Renfrew to sign the transfer payment agreement with the province of Ontario for the funding for the Network 24, and I believe now it's called Ottawa Valley Health Team, for that funding to fund the funding that was provided for that particular initiative. If committee recalls, we were provided direction or the authority to act as the banker for that group, and it is simply that, a banking arrangement. We hold the funds, their local steering committee sets direction and provides resolutions that I provide to Daniel in support of the expenditures associated with that fund. So again, just a banking arrangement we have as the fund holder, Chair. So that is there for information. Would you like me to stop there and before going to
yes,
the
I'll just see if we'll see if there's any questions on that one before we move to bylaw. Open it up for questions. Seeing none, so we can move to bylaws, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'll read the recommendation.
Yes.
That the Finance and Administration Committee recommend that County Council approve the corporate policy G-09 COVID-19 vaccination policy be repealed, and further that a bylaw to amend bylaw 63-03 being a bylaw to establish human resources, corporate policies and procedures for the County of Renfrew be adopted. So essentially, I'll leave it to you to get a mover and a second, Chair.
Yes. So a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Packett, seconded by Councillor Donahue. Well, go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just the background for the committee. This is our corporate vaccine policy that we put in place for not the homes and not paramedic services, as there are other directives that cover off those particular operations. It will essentially rescind our requirement to have our employees vaccinated for our non-union staff. That is consistent with the direction of the province of Ontario and public health. And we have been in contact with Dr. Cushman on this as well. And that is, where we're going as an organization with respect to being consistent with where the province is going and others. So I'll leave it at that. I think, if I may ask.
And I'll open it up to committee for questions. Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Donahue. Councillor Donohoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to verify, perhaps I had misheard, if Mr. Morrow said that this was applicable to non-union staff. Is that, I would think that it's broader than that, is it not? Certainly the paramedic service and long-term care operate under a different directive, but I think we have collective agreements outside of long-term care and paramedic services, do we not?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. You're absolutely right. Sorry for that miscommunication.
So it is this, the rescinding of this policy applies to everything except the paramedic service.
Yes, thank you. That's a better way to put it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Just actually, the chair is from where I'm sitting. He's over there.
Yes. Sorry to the chair.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, Councillor Donahue is correct, Chair Hunt.
Thank you.
Thanks. And if I could just follow up to the specifics of this policy, I think that the policy was absolutely necessary at the time that it was put in place. Certainly, I think that everyone here probably has now within their own municipalities, lower tier municipalities, now seen the correspondence from Dr. Cushman, the medical officer of health. As I had indicated at a meeting of heads of council with Dr. Cushman about a week or so ago, we in Admast and Brumley had enacted our vaccine policy based on the recommendation and request from Dr. Cushman. Subsequent to that, the request and recommendation from Dr. Cushman has been to be consistent and in synchronicity with the province of Ontario. So the time has come, in my estimation, to revoke, rescind this policy and continue to follow the advice of the medical officer of health for Renfrew County District.
Thank you. Any further questions or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor of the resolution as presented.
Chair.
I'm not sure if I'm freezing up. I seen 2 vote.
Yeah, I believe it's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, before we move on, just one more comment on this. So committee is aware, I have been having some conversations with Mike Blackmore, and again, some recent news and announcements coming out by the province of Ontario with respect to vaccine policies and mandates, and some announcements that have occurred. And we do have some concerns with the removal of the vaccine mandate for long-term care and the rescinding of that direction at the province. Knowing that, we will be having some conversations with folks from Advantage Ontario and Dr. Cushman. We initiated some of those as recently as this morning. And so we may be back to committee with a policy specific to requirement for staff that work in long-term care to continue to require vaccination. So I just wanted to alert committee to that the staff were investigating that.
And would that look at visitors as well to the facilities?
That's something we would have to look at, and we would look at the advice from Advantage Ontario and others on that particular piece.
Okay, thank you.
But for sure would include staff at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder for the report as a whole? The administration report as a whole. Moved by Councillor Bro, seconded by Councillor Donohoe. All in favor? Paul, I'm afraid, I think my internet might be freezing up, so I wonder if you can announce if we do have agreement.
Yes, sir, I can do that. If we could get a show of hands again quickly. That was unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And
we'll move actually, point of order, Mr. Chair, if I might. I'm certainly open to suggestion. I am just wondering if this is kind of outside of our procedures. I'm wondering if this continues, if in fact the committee should be appointing someone else to chair.
That is most certainly an option that could be done. But if it's deemed that Councillor Hunt's internet is not good enough to proceed, then we have another issue with respect to quorum today.
Okay, thank you.
So my recommendation is to continue to proceed as long as the chair can manage the meeting and feels that you can continue to do so. And I'm not disagreeing, Councillor Donahue. However, I think if the chair feels comfortable, then we can continue to proceed.
If I might, just to elaborate, this is, of course, it is not personal whatsoever. You are eminently capable of chairing, but I'm going all the way back to when we adopted the policy for virtual participation. It is appropriate if we were meeting in person and there was a problem with the chair, it would be appropriate at that point also. Yeah. So this is certainly not a slight on your skill whatsoever, but in order that the body can continue and not be subject to disruption from a poor internet connection.
Okay, and maybe what I'll do is when we call for the vote, I'll turn off my video, and if we can just keep our hands up until we have acknowledgement of passing of the resolutions.
And I can do that as the clerk. I can do that acknowledgement then. Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, we'll move to the Finance Administration, the Corporate Services. Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the Finance Committee. So beginning on page 9 is my report from Corporate Services. Under information, item number 1 is policy GA06, our investment policy, and we have enclosed investment policy performance reports from our broker, BMO Nesbitt Burns, for the year 2021 for both the Corporation of the County of Renfrew as well as the Renfrew County Housing Corporation. Item number 2, really just an update, if you will. In 2021 at our tax policy working group, which includes all of your local treasurers, we did make a recommendation to place in the 2022 budget for the County of Renfrew a provision for us to engage with a third-party consultant to conduct an assessment-based review. And I think in summary, the issue that was raised by your treasurers was before we get into the next reassessment cycle. And of course, we do not know when that cycle is. We are still operating on January the 1st, 2016 valuation. And I'm sure we all are aware of the fact that our property assessment database, compare that with sales information or market information, is woefully inadequate. We are preparing for a very significant change in that assessment. The province has delayed it during the COVID period. And the only news from the province is that in 2022 and in 2023, there will be no market-based assessment change. However, so one might suspect that they are leading up to a 2024 period, but we don't know that for sure. In any event, we thought that it was very important for us to engage in this assessment-based review. As of yesterday, I've seen some of the preliminary reporting that will be shared with all of your local treasurers at an upcoming meeting on March the 22nd or March the 23rd. And there's some work for all of us to do to understand. Essentially, this analysis provides an exception report for those properties who have experienced significant change, or vacant properties where there has been some recent sales activity on with no building related assessment changes. So it really gives your local treasurers an opportunity to investigate and confirm that the roll data is correct. And so we find that to be very important. Our external consultant, Municipal Tax Equity Consultants, really looks at this exercise as being a revenue generating exercise. I've said for years and years and years that only CVA growth is revenue generating, because reassessment is really just a shift in the tax burden. But this exercise really looks to ensure that we are properly assessing all of those exception properties within our municipalities. And of course, we want to get that done before the next taxation roll cycle for the 2023 taxation year. So it's important for us to go through this exercise this year. The engagement will also assist municipalities with audit follow-up and remediation efforts. We're looking at designing a bit of a training program for all the local treasurers in advance of this next assessment cycle, so that we are prepared to understand, should we participate in certain appeals, what is the likelihood of that appeal being successful, really looking at it from a different approach or a different angle, and ensuring that your treasurers are prepared to make those decisions about this property we should pursue, but this reassessment change really from a business case perspective is not something we should pursue. So we're quite excited to begin this process, and I'm sure you'll hear from your local treasurers as this thing moves forward. Item number 3, tax policy. Again, really just a follow-up to my previous point. At this same meeting of your local treasurers on an annual basis, we need to make some recommendations to this committee about tax policy for the 2022 year, so that we can take our, at the county level, at the local level, our municipal budgets, and we can create tax rates based on tax policies. So that meeting will occur on March the 22nd, and we will have recommendations for this committee in April, so that the County of Renfrew can set county municipal tax rates in the month of April. And that provides an opportunity then for each local municipality to use our tax policy and set tax rates. Of note, you may remember that last year, we made a decision that we would begin to reduce the industrial tax ratio from its current position to the provincial threshold of 2.63. We're going to do that over a phased-in approach over a 2-year period. And so once we have achieved a tax ratio at the provincial threshold level, we are no longer levy restricted from a budget point of view, so we can pass proportionate and equal share of the annual municipal budget increase to all property classes, including the industrial class. Right now, we are restricted to only passing 50% of any municipal budgetary increase onto that tax class. And so that's one of the items that you can expect to come forward, some analysis and some impact analysis, if you will, on making that change, reducing the liability for your industrial ratepayers, and distributing that to all of the other property tax classes. Item 4 is really just our workload from our Provincial Offences Office. I do want to highlight for you the last line item of the chart. In the month of February, we have never, in my memory, seen our number of charges processed through that office as low as it was in the month of February. And although we don't have any direct information, one can assume that our Highway Traffic Act enforcement individuals within Renfrew County may have been involved elsewhere in the province during the month of February. And that is certainly reflected in the number of charges, roughly 30% of what we might expect, or 40% of what we might expect for the month of February. Item 5, really again talking about the number of justices of the peace that are not available for provincial offences courts throughout Eastern Ontario. We are no different. In the month of February, we have canceled 3 court dates out of 5. So we only had 2 court dates available. And we are estimating that the backlog to clear this remains at about 13 months. We have no information from our regional senior justice of the peace on when we can expect any changes. We are all Eastern Ontario courts are scrambling for additional court dates. And even though it is virtual and the justice of the peace could appear from anywhere to any of these virtual courts. We simply cannot get access to justices of the peace to process these matters. Item number 6, then, we've attached as Appendix 2 a letter dated February the 11th from the AMO President to the Honorable Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada regarding a resolution of the calculation of payments in lieu of taxes for 2021 and 2022. And our own local mayor from the town of Petawawa is highlighted within that letter as an example of the local municipal impact that we might expect should the province not continue to pay the educational portion of that payment in lieu taxes for those municipalities that have those federal properties. So this is a significant issue, and it's not far away. It is right in our own backyard, and so we provide that for your information. And item number 7 is County of Renfrew WSIB actuarial report. This is the last item in my report. I have described that we are required to conduct an actuarial evaluation of WSIB liabilities every year, every 3 years, to meet our reporting requirements under the Public Sector Accounting Board recommendations for local governments. We have engaged with an actuary, and this is the 3rd time that this actuary has provided a report, so really covering a span from 2015 right up until today. They have completed the analysis of our liabilities for year-end, December 31st, 2021. And part of our engagement is for them to then forecast, based on their actuarial data, what our liability positions should be for each of our firm numbers on a go-forward basis for the years 2022 and 2023, at which time we must conduct another actuarial evaluation. The reports have been prepared, and they are attached as Appendix 3 in accordance with Section 3255 of the CPA Canada PSAB requirements. And I guess the bottom line of this is that our total WSIB liability has increased from $6.4 million December 31st, 2020 to $11,073,000 in December the 31st, 2021. What I have done on the next page is simply just provided you a chart. The first column really just reflects our WSIB firm numbers. So we have 5 of them operating at the County of Renfrew. For the Renfrew County Housing Corporation, Bonnechere Manor Employee Group, Miramichi Lodge Employee Group, our paramedic employees, as well as all other employees in all of the various different divisions and departments at the County of Renfrew. Based on our actuarial valuation in 2018, where we adjusted our liabilities rather significantly, we had also been funding based on a percentage of our payroll in each of these particular groups, an amount of money into that WSIB liability account on an annual basis in an attempt to ensure that we remain close to those actuarial designed liability targets for this year end. And after conducting their review, as you can see, we must book another $4.8 million adjustments to increase our provision for future liabilities as it relates to WSIB. By far and away, the lion's share of this adjustment happens within the paramedic services division. The entry of almost $3.5 million is identical to the adjustment we had to make 3 years ago, where we booked a $3.5 million increase in our liabilities for our paramedic services group. This committee may recall that in 2016, the province of Ontario made a change to the legislation, something where they added paramedics to the presumptive PTSD component of WSIB case management. And following that 2016 decision, as you can see in the chart, the little graphical chart, you can see that our liabilities for WSIB within our paramedic group have skyrocketed. So, Chair, perhaps that's a good spot for me to stop. I don't have any bylaws to come forward, only information items. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So we'll go back through. So item number 1, policy GA06 investment. Any questions on that? Councillor Donahue. Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions just to understand the reporting. So we certainly see a substantial fluctuation. Perhaps that's interest rate driven, but I think it's also driven by the funds held on deposit in these investments. But just at the bottom of page 16, top of page 17 gives the current calendar year. And in fact, right at the top of page 15 and 16. So at the top of page 16, so ultimately the value of this investment diminished by $1 million from 8.1 to 7.1. There was accrued interest of 70,000 that seems like it is reinvested as the total value is that 7.1 plus the interest. But there was not just that $1 million that was withdrawn, but an additional $190,240. So am I correct to understand that that would be the growth in value of the investment itself, that this is both income and growth, if you will, in that there is interest paid on these holdings over time, but in addition, any market growth, market capitalization growth on any of the investments held is reflected in that growth figure. Is that correct?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, yes, that is correct. Our program with Nesbitt Burns is as our GICs, and that's essentially our holdings with Nesbitt Burns. These are 5-year laddered GICs that are in conformance with Ontario regulation, forget the number, for eligible investments, and our own investment policy, essentially Schedule 1-2 banks under the Banking Act, very conservative and very solid investments, protecting our principal always. But as these investments mature, the interest is automatically deposited back into the County of Renfrew current accounts. And so, the performance that you see or the transactional data that you see is transferring those matured investments back into our current account. And that would be the change or the decreases that you note, other than the $1 million issue that Councillor Donahue highlighted. And when that particular investment became available for renewal, the rates were more than dismal as we looked into our 3 to 5 year planning cycle. At the same time, we had brought forward to this committee an opportunity for us to expand our investment choices through the one fund, LAS, into some equity positions. And so as the treasurer, I have returned that $1 million, so that matured investment, back into our current accounts, where we have a banking agreement with our local public sector employers, the RAG agreement, where we earn prime less 1.5. Today, prime is at 3.25%, less the 1.5. So we're earning 1.75% on that on a daily basis. And so what we are looking at now is exploring our options with the one group to reinvest that $1 million in some other higher interest, the potential for higher higher interest earning investments. So that's really what's been reflected in that. We have allowed that investment to mature. We've transferred it back into the RAG accounts. We're earning a pretty good return. We're actually earning a return higher than the 5-year GIC rates that were quoted to us when that investment matured. So we're doing well compared to that GIC marketplace, but we are very cautiously considering some options now for a placement in our accounts that we've opened up with the one fund. Thank you, Chair.
You're muted, Chair Hunt.
Sorry, Councillor Dunham.
Thank you. 2 questions. One is just a technical question, just in reference to Mr. Foss. That's OREG 43897, I think is what he was referencing. I think if I recall correctly, there was a certain level of let's call it gross municipal product to achieve the prudent investor status. Is that correct? Like, is the county of Renfrew still below that threshold whereby we are qualified as the prudent investor?
And through you, Chair, just going by memory, because this was 2018, I think, was the significant change to the prudent investor and the change that allowed for a regulation identifying the one fund to be that only opportunity for municipalities to place equity investments, if you will. The prudent investor status was enormous. Your capacity to qualify, I thought, was $150 million in liquid assets. So is available, but only for the largest regional governments within the province. There was some discussion early on about creating a cooperative of a number of municipalities to pool our investments together to be able to hit that target. But all other municipalities have chosen to engage with the one fund because of their status within the regulation to place those investments on our behalf.
Thank you. And just the final, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think that, and I haven't certainly informed myself fully on this, and perhaps at the end of the month, but I did inquire of Ms. Wilson, I guess earlier this week, if she could provide me a copy of policy GA06, which is the investment policy. And I just note in this, I don't believe that committee has this, but within there are, I think, 5 numbered items under procedure. The first being the investment powers of the corporation of the county of Renfrew are delegated to the treasurer as per section 418(5) of the Municipal Act. And I should also note that this policy GA06 was adopted in March 26th of 2003 and has not been revised. And the reason I'm bringing this forward is because the first item that I mentioned, section 418(5) of the Municipal Act, actually was repealed in 2006. So it doesn't actually exist in the Municipal Act, the first item in our investment policy. So I think that this certainly is subject to review. Having said that, it also strikes me in taking a kind of a cursory glance of OREG 43897, it also directs that the policies, but also the goals, the intent is to be part of our investment policy. And I think particularly this is an opportunity, since this obviously needs to have some amendment as it is now. I think it might also be time to give some consideration as we are moving forward with the climate action policy, or I'm not sure what perhaps name it has been given within the county of Renfrew. But this might be a time to give consideration towards having a goal of moving forward with respect to allocating perhaps even a portion of our investments into those types of holdings that would be towards climate action. So given that item number one really has been invalid for 16 years, I think that would be opportunity to give consideration to a broader statement of goals in addition to the policy itself.
Jeff?
Thank you, Chair. So the investment policy essentially references the Treasurer's ability to place investments within our investment guidelines. And those guideline documents were brought forward to this committee and to County Council in 2021 when we considered our opportunities to place some investments within the One Fund. This was not an opportunity available to us until the regulation changes that came in 2018, as Councillor Donahue referenced, the prudent investor opportunity for those regional governments with lots of available investment holdings, and for the rest of us, an ability to engage with the One Fund. And so our guidelines themselves, which would be versus the policy, which would be the guiding document for how we place our investments, were recently reviewed and amended and adopted by this committee and County Council. I believe that was the fall, October, perhaps, of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up, and I do acknowledge that I do not recall that just within the, or as I had stated, if there is a different policy that is setting out the goals of the investments, perhaps it would be better if it was rolled into one. Where I'm deriving this from is Section 7 of that OREG 43897 cites that in preparing the statement of the municipality's investment policies and goals, the council of the municipality shall consider the municipality's risk tolerance, the municipality's need for a diversified portfolio, and obtaining legal and financial advice with proposed investments as needed. So I think that as we are moving forward with a climate policy, climate action policy, I think that might be time. Whether it is successful or not, I think it would certainly be appropriate to give consideration to an investment policy that might have some regard to that. And the reason I'm saying that is because this policy, as it is written, is already out of date. It is quoting a piece of the Municipal Act that does not exist. So this obviously does need to have revision to bring it into current alignment with the Municipal Act.
Jeff, do you want to comment on that?
Well, we certainly should update our guiding document, which is the investment policy. The rest of those items within that regulation are dealt with within our investment guidelines. Those would be the guidelines we reviewed in the fall of 2021, which would indicate our level of tolerance with placing investments in the various investment categories that are outlined within that regulation, including our amended opportunity or option, if you will, to place equity investments with the One Fund. What we could do, and if this council was interested in exploring that as an item, is we could once again revise those guidelines, if that was the direction of council, to seek opportunities. I think this is Councillor Donahue's issue, seek some opportunities that would invest a portion of our funds within with some relationship to our climate action plan, and that, of course, that plan is not before council as yet.
Thank you. Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you through you to Mr. Foss. Certainly, Mr. Foss did put his finger on. I'm fairly certain that all of the committee will have at one time or another heard of ethical investing. I think that is very fraught for a municipality to arrive at what we may consider as the framework or the paradigm by which that would be put into place. But I think that there is opportunity, and at this point, I'm not suggesting that necessarily council would agree to move in that direction, but I think it would be appropriate in developing a comprehensive action plan for this municipality that some consideration be given to that. As I'd stated, though, I think that probably in the relatively near term, given that we are quoting, once again, a piece of the Municipal Act that does not exist, would suggest that this policy should be revised this year. Having said that, I also don't know, and perhaps it may not be necessarily within the purview of this committee, but if we have a policy that has not been revised or reviewed since 2003, I think that perhaps we should have a schedule for reviewing said policies.
Thank you. Do you want to speak to that, Jeff or Paul?
I'm happy to speak to it. If we are to do this, I need some direction to staff from committee. I need some type of motion, Chair, that would direct us to look at this policy.
So Councillor Donahue, do you want to put a motion forward that the policy, and are you suggesting other policies that are outdated as well?
Well, I think Mr. Morrow is speaking probably particular to the main thrust of what I have been trying to disclose or discuss here, which is whether council may have an appetite for inserting into our guidelines for our investments something that would be taking into consideration our climate goals, et cetera. So confining it to that, I think, Mr. Moore, if I'm correct, I think with respect to perhaps stale-dated policies, that's something that is certainly internal, that would be driven. If they are outdated, they need to be put into date. But I think you're looking specifically for that. So yes, I would move that in that, and I'm not sure where to direct this, and I'm certainly open to revision. The development of the climate action plan, I'm going to call it that for lack of a better word. I don't know if we have a working title. That is currently housed within Development and Property and Mr. Kelly's office. So I guess what it would be is that as part of the development of the action plan for the County of Renfrew, that consideration be given to including investment guidelines and policies for the County of Renfrew as they pertain to action and climate change. That's a mouthful, sorry.
Paul, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And if I may, that given that is a policy type recommendation and should be a decision of County Council, so the recommendation should be that the Finance and Admin Committee recommends to County Council that the future climate action change plan take into consideration the future investments of the County of Renfrew as an element of that plan.
Thank you. Is that fine, Councillor Donahue?
Certainly, I have no issue with advancing this to council. I would submit we're not actually adopting, and I'm not sure that we necessarily would be adopting. I was simply recommending that consideration be given to that in the development of the plan. Certainly, we'll defer Mr. Morrow to Mr. Morrow, Mr. Chair, on whether even that direction to give consideration to it requires direction from council.
If it's just to give the consideration to it and instruction to staff, then we can provide that direction, I believe, and then ultimately council will make the decision on the overall climate action plan. So Chair, sorry, Councillor Donahue, I don't disagree with the nuance that you're suggesting at all.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we adopt that policy at this point. What I am suggesting is that be part of the development, or at least given consideration in the development of that climate plan for the County of Renfrew, and that a comprehensive plan is going to come forward to county for careful consideration, revision, and ultimately adoption. So right now it would just be to add. The motion would be to include that in consideration in the development of the policy.
Understood, sir. That is direction to staff then from this committee.
And so do you need a mover and a seconder for that? So that was moved by Councillor Donahue, and we need a seconder. Seconded by seconded by Warden Robinson. Thank you. All in favor?
Could I have a recorded vote, Mr. Chair?
Oh, yes, you can do a recorded vote. Actually,
Outweighted.
Yep, outweighted. Okay.
Councillor Doncaster.
Yeah, just point of order, Mr. Chair. If this is just direction or for staff to take consideration of the recommendation, I'm fine with that. But if not, would we not need a notice of motion for this type of thing?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Doncaster. We're at the committee level, so this is the notice of motion that, it's direction to staff at the committee level that I do not believe requires notice of motion.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
So there was moved by Councillor Donahue, second by Warden Robinson. All in favor?
Sorry, I think the warden might have had a question, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Warden Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry I'm going to ask if through you to Mr. Morrow that he could read the motion one more time, please.
Okay, thank you. So the motion, as I understand it, is that the Finance and Admin Committee directs staff to consider the investment strategy for the County of Renfrew in the development of the Climate Action Plan currently underway.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
It's a recorded vote, actually.
I'm sorry.
I'll call for the vote, Chair, if I may, and I'll run through the voting, sir.
Thank you.
Councillor Donahue, for or against?
For.
Councillor Brose, for or against?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Peckett, for or against?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Doncaster, for or against?
For.
Okay. Warden Robinson, for or against?
For.
Thank you. And Chair, for or against?
For.
Thank you. The Chair, the vote passes 5-6.
Thank you. Anything further on item number 1? Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification. So during the break time, I had a look at our policy GA06. That policy was updated. Let me just see. That policy was updated on October the 27th of 2021 at the same time that we updated our investment guidelines. So I believe that issue has been reviewed and updated during our presentation in the fall. Thank you.
Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before I respond to Mr. Foss, could you repeat what I thought I heard you say, Mr. Moore, it was 5-6. I didn't understand that. The recorded vote result.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And to Councillor Donahue, if you look at the chat, I just updated the results.
Okay, so in fact, it is 5 votes in favor and 1 opposed.
Yes, 5 for, 1 against. My apologies.
I couldn't see 11 faces on the screen.
Yes.
In any event, thank you. Just in responding to Mr. Foss, I certainly will allow that perhaps I am seeing someone out of date. What I'm looking at as policy GA06 is the one that I was provided earlier this week, which only cites the date of the adoption with no revision date cited whatsoever. Given that perhaps I'm looking at an outdated policy, I wonder if perhaps I could be provided the most current policy.
Certainly, Chair. I'll just send that to you momentarily.
Thank you. Anything further on item 1? Seeing not, item number 2, 2022 budget, MTE. Questions or concerns? I have one question to Jeff. The assessment role audit study, what numbers are they looking at? Are they looking at the last assessment that was provided, or is it something that was updated?
Certainly, Chair. So we have a return roll for the 2022 taxation year. That return roll would have been updated with all of the growth information in 2021, which is important. And that's our new revenue that we review with council at budget time each year. But also any of the appeals that have been processed right up into the 2021 year for the 2022 taxation cycle. So we are dealing with the most current assessment database. Our consultant actually engages directly with MPAC on getting that current roll, but it has no updated market value assessment. This is only growth that has been updated every year, as well as any of the appeal decisions that have taken place. That is all updated in the roll. So we're still operating on a 2016 market value with any growth or any appeal decisions processed within that roll. So the database we're looking at is pre-market change, because we don't know when that market change is yet going to happen. I'm suspecting 2024, we'll see the impacts of that, but we're waiting from an announcement from the Ministry of Finance on when that's going to happen. So the exercise we're going through is ensuring that the information we have on properties is accurate before we further muddle the assessment information with market change information. So we want to get this clean. We want to make any adjustments or corrections to this assessment information before we layer on top of it a new and updated market change. And we all know that market change is going to be substantial, so that when we bring forward to County Council our analysis, our tax policy analysis after the market change, we'll be dealing strictly with current value assessment. What is the sales information and how is that driving shifts in taxation that will occur between property owners in a class, between classes, and in a two-tier environment, there will be a shift between municipalities because of that new and updated market value assessment.
Okay, thank you. And further questions. So this study that we're doing now, perhaps a study similar to this would need to be done after the 2024, if that's the time frame that it comes in. I'll give you an example. There's a couple properties listed in our township this week on MLS, and they show the ask value for them is in excess of $300,000, and it shows the taxes on them at $300, which would suggest that they're assessed at $25,000 to $35,000. And it's something we've been kind of harping at in the past, but have been unable to get it changed. And I think one of these studies have to, once we get the new assessed value, has to come out with some kind of an exception reporting on that kind of thing across the county, so that we have more fair and transparent assessed values all over. So I'm just wondering if we could consider that, when we get to the new assessed values.
Well, thank you, Chair. And actually, your examples that you've highlighted from your current role are already identified in this impact analysis provided by MTE. So we have a report specific to each municipality with those outlier properties, if you will, identified. There's a table of 16 different data components for each municipality. And one of those tables compares CVA to sales market information for those properties that have sold and there's transactions on them. And so this analysis looks to be, I just got it this week, but it looks to be very thorough and identifies those types of properties in each of your municipalities that would be outliers that require further follow-up and investigation. Though that follow-up, MTE will guide us through how we engage with MPAC on clearing up this role and cleaning up this role. And again, we need to do that before the market information is layered again on top of it. So these are obvious, I'm not going to call them errors, but there are obvious issues with these roll numbers. And so we're getting some homework. Each of the treasurers in the county of Renfrew will be assigned some homework to investigate these properties and get some information on is that assessment information correct for that property? If it is, then we have an understanding of what's going on. If it's not, then there's a process for us to ensure that MPAC rectifies those, I'm going to call those errors, before we move any farther along in the reassessment market change process.
Okay. Well, that's very consoling to hear that, because MPAC, would not share that with us. But now with this exception report, it seems like we'll be taking it to MPAC and try to ensure that it's reassessed properly in whatever year the new assessment comes out. Councillor Donoghue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly acknowledge the enormity of or complexity, the enormous complexity actually of assessment and current value, and certainly will await, I think, for a more fulsome discussion after we've seen the report both here and at each of our own municipalities, and certainly correcting records. Particularly as Mr. Foss has noted, given that we know that there is a reassessment coming up, I think that it behooves us, as he has said, to make sure that we have things in a good solid foundation moving on to the next assessment. I am curious, I'm not sure if it was at this agency, that is the County of Renfrew, if it was my own municipality, where I was discussing the tax ratios themselves. The burden substantially varies, and I know this because not in the last assessment, but in the one prior, I'm going to dare say that would be 2012, there was enormous increase in water-related properties, waterfront, and in fact, I think in 2012 was the first time you actually were assessed if you could look at water. It became a water view category that had previously not existed. That was a substantial driver of assessment change in 2012 and 2016. I know the agricultural community, being a holder of agricultural properties, I think on average I saw about a 60% assessment over that 4 years that is just now being put into place. But I am terribly curious to understand each time there's a reassessment, whoever ultimately is seeing a substantial increase in their proportion makes presentation that the ratio should be changed. I think that that's probably universal at each assessment change. But I'm wondering if there was ever anything as the baseline that we can compare something to, i.e. the agriculture assessment for those qualified properties, likewise with managed forest, is 25% of the residential rate. Now, if my value of my properties relative to residential have doubled, then essentially I'm no longer paying 25%, I'm paying 50%. So I think that some things that we are going to deal with may approach unknowable, but I'm just wondering if there is any kind of baseline that can rationalize and provide me some kind of policy basis when inevitably I'm going to hear from various sectors of how inequitable the taxes are.
Thank you. Do you want to speak to that, Jeff?
Well, certainly I can, but not. I can't, predict the future as well. But the reassessment cycle that took place in 2016 that Councillor Donoghue references, we had a very thorough analysis and presentation to committees and council, all of council, on the impacts of the reassessment that took place with a full understanding of the shifts in taxation because of the reassessment. And as I mentioned, between properties, between classes, and between municipalities in a two-tier system. The comments about the significant increase in agricultural assessment, we did a deep dive on that in our presentation to council at the time. And I believe, there's a lot of numbers kicking around my desk, and certainly this time of the year with the auditors in place, but 3,300 farm properties rings a bell in all of Renfrew County. When we analyzed the impact of the reassessment change on those 3,300 properties, 3,200 were less than $100. And the other properties, we did an analysis on the remaining 100 properties, and I can't recall sort of the outcome of that. But from your tax policy working group, that's your treasurers, through to finance committee and county council, it was our position, because we heard from several of the farm lobbies, to change our ratio, lowering it even further from the 0.25 to something else. But given that analysis, there was no support for moving off of that particular ratio from the 2016 analysis. No idea what we're going to see in the next market assessment cycle, but that's really where we were in 2016. And as Councillor Donahue referenced, we had a very significant increase the cycle prior for residential properties on water. And council had a look at that and understood what that impact was, and we made no change to reduce the burden for that particular group of property owners as well. So that's the tax policy presentation and the data analysis that we do to understanding, what's the numbers behind the reassessment changes is critically important for council to understand, and really to understand the impacts to our property owners because of the reassessment changes that are taking place. So that's maybe all I can offer from history. And that's kind of going from memory from a long time ago, but the farm issue came back a couple of times, and we provided various groups of property owners our analysis and our reasoning behind not changing that particular ratio. We also are in pretty close communication with the rest of Eastern Ontario through the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus Treasurers Group. And I believe there was only one municipality who made a change to their ratio. That might have been Prince Edward County, going from 0.25 down to 0.23, or maybe Northumberland, but increased the ratio back up again a year or two later. So the farm tax issue got lots of traction during the last assessment cycle. But I think the analysis right across Eastern Ontario bore out our experience is that the net change for the majority of those farm property owners, given the tax rates and the 0.25 ratio, was less than $100 for most of our properties. Thank you.
Just one further question, Jeff. So if I'm understanding this correctly, if residential doubled in assessed value and farmland stayed the same, it would pay substantially less. But if they both doubled, the amount of taxation should be consistent.
Well, what's that saying about, the tide rises all boats, kind of identically. And if we see tremendous increases in market change, and we're hearing, in some municipalities, 100%, we're doubling our assessed values. If all of the categories increase at 100%, there is no shift in the tax burden between the classes. Likewise, in the residential class, as an example, if in your community, your property goes up by 75 or 80 or 100%, but you're the same or the average of all of the other residential properties around you, there'll be no impact to your property from a tax shift perspective. But if you increase at 100% and your neighbors are going up by 50, there is no doubt that there's a shift in the burden toward your particular property. And we have a number of schedules that we present during our tax policy workshop at reassessment time that really helps us all understand what the impact of those specific scenarios are when we have reassessment changes. So, the nice, I think every property owner would like to be somewhere around the average because you're not going to experience, those significant changes in your tax bill from your municipality. Stay with the average is a good thing. In excess of the average will cost you some additional money. Yeah.
Councillor Brose, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Foss. So the MTV review that has been done or is in process, one of the things that I'm curious, do they identify or flag, or is this part of the municipality's homework? We have some waterfront lots where there's been a trailer for, I'm going to say 10 years, it's probably longer. It's still identified as a vacant lot in the tax roll. Is that something that MTE would identify, or is that the part of the homework that the municipality has to get done?
Through you, Chair, kind of hard to really deal with specific situations without really, understanding the history, of the property. What maybe I could do, Councillor Brose, is just from the table of contents from the report that I'm looking at, there are two parts to the report that's coming from MTE. The first one is proactive assessment-based management review and analysis. And we're looking at 6 or 7 different tables, if you will. And these are identifying specific properties where we have detailed major property assessment changes, lands with possible improvements, and that may speak to your example, lands awaiting development, comparison of rate per acre for vacant lands, property classification reviews. So again, anomalies or exceptions that have been identified as potential in the wrong property classification, exempt property review, and then finally, an assessment to sales comparison review, which I think was mentioned earlier in our meeting today, where we have properties that are assessed at $50,000 and the selling price is $350,000. All of those properties are identified in a schedule for each of your municipalities to, as a homework assignment for your treasurers, to really look into what's going on those particular properties. And our consulting group is even suggesting that, for our local municipalities, might be worth a jump in the car and find out, visually have a look at that property to ensure that we really understand what is happening on each of these identified roll numbers within those categories. Sorry, I didn't quite finish that one. That's the proactive assessment-based management review. There's a reactive review as well, really looking at the active assessment appeals, major assessment appeals, requests for consideration, history and summary, assessment review board changes, requests for reconsideration changes. I'm saying all that just to let you know that the analysis is thorough. This organization does this type of work right across Ontario. Very professional, very seasoned and experienced. No one on this call today will remember this, but in the year 2000, we used municipal tax equity consultants when we were required to begin creating our own tax policy framework for the county of Renfrew. So they've been around a long time. I've been engaged with some of these principles for a long, long time. These guys know what they're doing, and really looking forward to working with them on this phase of the process, if you will.
Thank you. Councillor Brose.
So just so I'm clear, Mr. Foss, you said you were going to send a copy. Was it just a cover sheet, or just, it would be good to have that on the various items that they look at?
And through you, Chair, at our March the 22nd meeting with our local municipalities, our principal on this engagement, a fellow by the name of Greg Powell, will introduce himself to your treasurers, will explain the engagement on behalf of the County of Renfrew, will explain the report for each of your municipalities, and following that meeting, each treasurer will receive their own copy of all of those identified properties in your municipality, which will begin the homework assignments for all of us.
Thank you. Anything further on that? Seeing not, so we'll move to item 3, tax policy. Any questions on that? 4, provincial offenses administration workload. Councillor Donoghue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you through you to Mr. Foss. Just while some of the discussion was going on, I actually pulled up the last 3 years. The average from 2019, 20, and 21 for February has been 500. So we are only at 61% of the average. In fact, the lowest of any of those 3 years was just last year with 450. So even at the lowest, it was 150, or rather it was 50% higher than it is this year. So just in picking up on that, and perhaps at risk if we were in person of committee maybe throwing things at me, we did correspond with the Office of the Attorney General. So I will ask this question at each monthly meeting. Have we yet received a response from the Office of the Attorney General with respect to the dramatic decline in the number of Provincial Offences Act cases that we are seeing in Renfrew County?
And through you, Chair, I believe the warden has written several rather eloquent letters seeking information and response. To my knowledge, I have not seen a response as yet. Our admin assistant, Connie Wilson, is on the call today, and she might just help me with my memory on this issue, but I don't believe it's crossed my desk. I suspect we have not received one.
Mr. Chair, if I might thank you through you to Mr. Foss, thank you, and I will repeat in 1 month's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peckett.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite understandable for the lack of charges in the past month, because having connections with the OPP, there was a lot of officers seconded from all around Eastern Ontario into the city of Ottawa for that two or 3 weeks or month that the truckers were there. Thank you.
Councillor Donoghue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to Councillor Peckett. I appreciate the information that he's provided, and let me say that as one of the municipalities paying base funding to the OPP, I'm very pleased that I could participate along with the partner municipality, the City of Ottawa, in providing policing through the month of February. As everyone is quite aware, the patrol of roadways is a part of our base policing costs. So very pleased to have been able to contribute towards the police response to the protest in the City of Ottawa.
Thank you. Anything further on item 4? Item 5, provincial offense administration backlog. Item 6, AMO calculation of payments. Any questions there? And item 7, WSIB, County of Renfrew.
I think, Mr. Chair, Mr. Morrow might have had a comment on item 6.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Paul?
that's fine. Very quick comment, Chair. Just with respect to item 6, as recently as yesterday evening, the CAO for the town of Petawawa has been in contact with me, continuing to express the town's concerns with respect to the payments in lieu and the change in policy or direction. So I just wanted to confirm and let the Finance and Admin Committee know that that issue has yet to be resolved with respect to payments in lieu, and in the County of Renfrew will cost some local municipalities a significant amount with respect to revenues. Thank you for that, Chair.
Councillor Doncaster, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, certainly the town of Petawawa is impacted. The town of Deep River is impacted quite significantly also, as well as most municipalities. So I'm just looking, we've calculated some of this. So even Pembroke Arnprior, Renfrew, Horton, McNabb, Braeside, almost everybody's on here. So, so any of the, any municipality that has federal properties is potentially affected by this. For the town of Deep River, it's in excess of $300,000 that is at risk. So, you can calculate that into, 6-7% tax increase, to cover that off if should that come to fruition. So we certainly have been working with Petawawa in highlighting this issue that's been coming forward for about the last year. So anyway, it does affect all of us though. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on 6? Now we'll get to 7, WSIB, County of Renfrew. Questions? Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Foss. I'm for a layman, I guess. So this has had an adjustment, and the last time that we went through this, I think this, if I'm not mistaken, this is on a biannual or perhaps every 3 years. There is the requirement for this actuarial review. So this adjustment is predicated on the data over the course of the last 3 years, which, as Mr. Foss had noted, I think that a significant contributing component was the designation of presumptive with respect to PTSD. The value was, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me. I think the adjustment was maybe $3.5 million. I'm curious how that compares with the previous adjustment that did see a significant rise in the WSIB to remain current. At all of which, and it's probably imprecise, but I presume that it is somewhat of an indicator of if we have plateaued or if we are still continuing to see a rising exposure to substantially higher WSIB claims.
Jeff, would you like to speak to that?
Certainly, thank you. In 2018, when we conducted the identical analysis, we brought forward to council the unfortunate news that we had a significant increase in our liability provision. And at that time, it was specific to paramedic services. We booked an adjustment in December of 2018 at $3,511,966. With that report came, as I mentioned, not only does the actuarial look at the 2018 year, but they forecast where we should be with our liability position for each of the next 2 years until we do this full-blown assessment or analysis once again. So at that time, we had an increase in our liability recognition of $3.5 million. We also increased our burden factor. So for every dollar of payroll that we pay our paramedic services, we are putting away a provision of 9% of that payroll to help us ensure that our WSIB liability remains somewhere close to what our actuary is targeting for us. In 2018, our WSIB expenses for paramedics, that's the payments that we're making to WSIB for paramedic related loss of earnings or medical costs, were about $600,000 on an annual basis. They, in 2021, are 67% higher. They are over $1 million on an annual basis. Our number of claims, that's the number of individuals that have in-force claims, has increased by 75%. We are increasing in our activity level and our expenses with respect particularly to paramedic services. And so although the journal entry to recognize the heightened liability is about the same, $3.5 million this year, the same as what it was 3 years ago, we have already increased our cost provisions in order to meet a target where the actuary expected us to be this year, but we're $3.5 million higher than what the actuary anticipated based on our in-force claims. It's not that we've engaged the services of a company called Frontline Resilience, working with our paramedic services department in order to get a handle on these spiraling costs and spiraling claims. So we have invested significant dollars since the fall of 2020 with this third party assisting us specifically with PTSD related matters, if you will, or mental health related matters. So there's been a very significant investment with that organization as well. However, the financial results are not necessarily telling us that we're being very successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Paul.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to committee. Jeff did a fantastic, job of explaining that. One comment I would make would be that we have two issues that we continue to be confronted by. That again would be, as Jeff mentioned earlier on at the outset, is the presumptive nature of the legislation. So we really have no means as to questioning it. That has been the role of Frontline Resilience. But one of our challenges also on the other side of it is the administration of the WSIB files. Once they land on the lap of WSIB, we have a limited ability to manage them. So the objective with Frontline Resilience is to get them before they get to WSIB. But once they are in the hands of WSIB, it is very cumbersome, very challenging to get these folks back to work. And, that has resulted in more folks becoming off and on WSIB. So again, a real challenge that we face. I think we need to continue to strategize as an organization to figure out a better way to resolve this issue. I will say, talking to my colleagues throughout Eastern Ontario, this situation is not unique to us. The City of Toronto and paramedics alone has over a $40 million future liability associated with this as well. So again, not unique to us. I am talking to the local CAOs in Eastern Ontario about this issue, and we'll continue to raise it with them as well, because I think we all have a similar type issue. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Very comprehensive answer. I will echo Mr. Morrow's comments from Mr. Foss. I'm of course, to proceed here very carefully, but just on percentage-wise, sometimes that's not detailing the full picture, because you'd indicated, Mr. Foss, 75% increase, but if we've had 4 and there's 3 new ones, that's 75%. in absolute terms, I'm wondering if we have some grasp on the status. And just while I'm asking that, that would be question one, but I'll put this one out there too, Mr. Chair. In responding to both Mr. Morrow and Mr. Foss, I'm assuming that liability as expressed through the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board is one of the costs that is captured and shared with our funding partner, that is the province of Ontario. So presumably the province of Ontario is going to be seeing a substantial request at the very least to pick up, well, as the province sees it, their half being 49% to our 51%.
Jeff?
So there's a couple of questions in there. The first one was dealing with percentages. So in 2018, our payments to WSIB for the paramedic program were about $600,000. They're about 1.1 million. So that's an increase on an annual basis of about 67% in our payments to WSIB. That corresponds fairly well with the in-force claims as of December the 31st. In 2018, we had 8 in-force claims. A couple of those have dropped off fairly quickly thereafter, but at December the 31st, 2021, we have 14 in-force claims. That's a 75% increase in the number of in-force claims. At year end, that corresponds fairly well with the increase in the expenditures that we are seeing. So the two of those percentages are supportive of our increase in liabilities. The actuary did not anticipate or expect we would have a 75% increase in the number of in-force claims at year end. And so that is primarily the reason why the future liabilities must be adjusted so dramatically in order to recognize that we are putting more and more people on the WSIB program. And as Paul mentioned, once they are part of the WSIB process, we don't have an awful lot of levers at our disposal to manage those cases. They are managed directly by WSIB. I think the other question was with respect to our financial support. And this committee will not be surprised, being the finance committee, that paramedic services on an annual basis receives a funding letter from the province of Ontario. That funding letter is based on our council approved budget from 2 budget years ago. And so the funding share by the province of Ontario for this adjustment will not be recognized in 2022 because they are operating on our 2020 or 2021 council approved budget in order to cash flow us some support for 2022. We are going to lag, if you will, in seeing any of those funds, cost shared funds from the province of Ontario because of this.
Anything further? One question, Jeff. When we book this adjustment of 4.8 million or whatever it is, when it comes time to do that, what's the offsetting entry on that? Where does the money come from?
So from an accounting entry, we are debiting WSIB expense proportionately based on the firm numbers on all of the accounts that are reporting up for those various programs. The credit increases on the balance sheet our liabilities, WSIB liabilities, essentially what you're looking at on the top of page 13. So for paramedic services, currently, before this adjustment, we had a liability provision of 5.3 million. So we will increase that liability by 3.4 million. So at year end, our liability related to WSIB for paramedic services will be $8.8 million.
So is that actually a budget expense? I don't recall it being that?
It certainly is not part of our budget. We did not anticipate this. The impact on our budget is essentially that burden factor, if you will, the percentage of our payroll, like CPP or EI or EHT or any of those payroll-related burden factors. So for every dollar we pay a paramedic, we're putting 9% of that into this WSIB liability account at the direction of the actuary to ensure that we have enough funds in there to match the actuarial report for liabilities we need to recognize in future periods. And so that is the budget impact, is that 9%, and that is reflected in each and every year. The problem is that we're not keeping up with our liabilities, even at our 9% burden factor. And so this is something we're going to recognize in our actual financial statements as opposed to our budget. Now, for future budget periods, we're going to have to recognize a higher cost for benefits, if you will, or payroll burden factors for our paramedic services program.
Thank you. So, and that would actually have a budget impact. Like, this money would not be coming from a reserve to pay for this expense. It would be actually a budget impact in future years.
Yeah, and we're going to see a charge to our financial statements in 2021 equal to $4.8 million spread amongst all of those programs. By far and away, the largest adjustment will show up in the paramedic services department. Almost $3.5 million will be the December 2021 charge against our operation to reflect that liability of $8.8 million.
Okay. One last question on this is like the paramedics throughout the last few years have taken on additional responsibility in home visits and work at the hospital and so on. Is there any concern that the burden that is been put on them is cause of any of the additional WSIB?
In response, Chair, I wouldn't have any information on the actual, I'm going to call it the medical information or the case information, if you will. This is really only a financial exercise to recognize our future responsibilities. Our employee health coordinator, in conjunction with our psychologists at Frontline Resilience, would be the only individuals that could speak to that question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, Paul, if that is something that is being looked at as well, though, you know, as a...
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and through you to committee on that question. It is absolutely a challenge for us. It really, as Jeff has indicated, that is truly a question for our employee health coordinator and Chief Nolan. I go back to the conversation, though, that Chief Nolan has had with me, and a big part of our challenge is our ability to manage these cases, because as Jeff has indicated, once they are in the hands of WSIB, it's out of our hands. So again, we don't clearly understand all the details. And I go back to the presumptive nature of the legislation we're now working with. I think if that were to be different and we were able to manage it differently through Frontline Resilience, which we had hoped would work for us, maybe some of the outcomes would be different. I think, as Jeff indicated, we've had some success. We've gotten some people off, not enough.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Seeing none. So can I have a mover and a seconder to accept the corporate services report as a whole? Moved by Councillor Donohoe, second by Councillor Brose. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Anything under new business? I don't think so. No closed meeting. The date of the next meeting is Thursday, April.
My apologies, Chair. Just the one item under new business, and I'll be very quick, sir. The other day, I think it was Monday, committee received a letter that I provided to both Health Committee. I did overview it with Health yesterday. It was a letter that provided the County of Renfrew with notification that we received on February 25th regarding an additional $1.5 million in support of emergency services as it relates to very specifically vaccine distribution and COVID funding expenses. Attached to that was a schedule that provided us with some funding guidelines as well. I did want to inform committee that we have some work to do on this. Chief Nolan has some questions. They do reference a March 2014 agreement. So we have reached out to the province to better explain what that refers to. Our concerns that we are raising with respect to this letter is, and in a good way, we've received significant funding already for these particular items from the province. Our challenge will be to attribute some of our expenses to this funding because we've done it elsewhere already through previously received funding. So I just wanted to bring that information to this committee's attention. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Donoghue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you through you to Mr. Morrow. The only element that I would wish to add, in the report yesterday, which was precisely the same as what was provided in an email Tuesday, I believe, to the Finance and Administration Committee, the agreement that was referenced from 2014, Chief Nolan yesterday provided some context. So 2014 was essentially the inception of the community paramedicine role. There was initial outlay of $6 million over a number of years. And forgive me, certainly Chief Nolan has this at his disposal, at his fingertips. But that was the foundation, essentially, of the community paramedicine program. So the province was going all the way back to that agreement as the means whereby these funds were being provided. As certainly this committee and all of council knows, the community paramedicine program has evolved substantially. We were swimming when we started, and now we're walking on the earth. That's the evolution. So that's the uncertainty that's surrounding why that would be the basis for this. But of course, what Chief Nolan also had addressed yesterday, and perhaps Mr. Foss weigh in if you see fit, that we have had substantial funding flowed to the County of Renfrew for both of these elements. That is the direct COVID response by the paramedic service, but in addition, the vaccine handling, et cetera. So it is now in an enormously time-constrained situation, as Mr. Foss had already explained. He has numbers just swimming all around his head in his office, probably occupying most of his life right now. And here we have essentially a little over 2 weeks to try and identify perhaps some particular expenditures that may not have been funded under a previously announced and provided program. So those are perhaps a little bit more in the weeds context of what the challenges are, given that the 11th hour announcement of this 1.5 million. At this point, I probably shouldn't do this, but I would venture to say that it would be an enormous challenge. That's a nice big number, but I think it would be an enormous challenge to take advantage fully of that. However, that being said, if we are unable to take advantage of that, it's probably because we received substantial funding through other envelopes.
Thank you. Anything further?
That was very good. Thank you, Chair.
So the date of the next meeting is Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Can I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Doncaster, seconded by Councillor Brose. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.